Delilah's unexpected appearance that cold morning caught everyone off guard, leaving a palpable sense of confusion and concern hanging in the air. The schoolyard, usually full of the typical hustle and bustle of students greeting their friends, fell eerily quiet as she appeared. Her small figure darted towards the bus, her eyes wide with fear, as if she were running from something or someone. Every step she took seemed rushed, frantic, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her fragile shoulders. She gripped her worn-out backpack tightly, as if it were her only lifeline, her knuckles white from the tension. Her mismatched clothes, too thin for the chilly morning air, only added to the sense that something was amiss. She wasn't dressed for the cold, and her breath came in sharp, quick bursts, visible in the frigid air. As Delilah reached the bus driver, her voice trembled as she spoke, but the words barely made sense, her fear overwhelming her ability to form a coherent sentence. The bus driver, confused and unsure, tried to reassure her, but Delilah barely heard him, her eyes darting nervously, never resting on one spot. Her gaze was filled with deep anxiety, and it was as if she were constantly scanning her surroundings for a threat that no one else could see. There was a palpable sense of urgency in her every movement, as though she was racing against something, time, a danger, or a situation she couldn't escape. Teachers and staff who had witnessed her arrival exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this wasn't just another child who had missed the bus or was late for school. There was something profoundly unsettling about the way Delilah moved, the way she avoided eye contact and rushed through the motions. Her body was rigid with fear, her posture hunched as if she were bracing for something terrible to happen. It was clear to everyone that she wasn't just a frightened child, she was someone who had been through something far worse, something that had left an indelible mark on her. The once ordinary morning now felt like the beginning of something ominous, with Delilah at the center, caught in a storm that no one around her fully understood. Delilah's eyes flickered nervously, the trembling in her voice growing more pronounced as she spoke. I didn't mean to. I didn't know what else to do. She stopped, her words choked off by the weight of her fear. Her gaze dropped to the ground, as if she couldn't bear to meet anyone's eyes, her hands twisting anxiously around the strap of her backpack. The bus driver, trying to make sense of the situation, leaned in slightly, urging her to continue. "Delilah," he said softly, "what happened? You're safe here." But Delilah only shook her head, her body rigid with tension. Her next words came out in a whisper, barely audible over the quiet morning air, but they sent a cold shiver through the bus driver and anyone within earshot. I saw him again. He's back. He said he would find me no matter where I went." Her voice cracked, and she wiped a tear from her cheek, her whole body trembling. There was a long, uncomfortable pause as her words sank in. The bus driver exchanged a look with the nearest teacher, who had approached when they heard Delilah's fearful whisper. Delilah's fear was not only visible in her trembling hands and watery eyes, but in the way she was nearly gasping for breath, as though the mere act of speaking about whatever had happened was nearly more than she could handle. "I ran," Delilah continued, her voice now breaking with the weight of her confession. I couldn't stay there. I thought maybe if I left, if I got away, he wouldn't find me. I didn't know what else to do." Her words tumbled out in a rush, and the look of pure terror on her face painted a picture of someone who had experienced something far beyond the scope of her years. The teachers exchanged worried glances, but none of them could bring themselves to speak. The air was thick with concern, but there was also a sense of helplessness. How could they protect her from whatever it was that had her so terrified? Delilah's confession was unsettling, and it left a lingering question hanging in the air. Who was this mysterious figure that had instilled so much fear in her? What had he done to her, and how could they help her now? The morning, which had started as a typical school day, had now become the beginning of a chilling story, one that none of them could have predicted. Sam's heart raced, his mind whirling as Delilah's words echoed in his ears. He couldn't stand to see her so broken, so vulnerable. Every instinct in him screamed that he needed to act, to do something, anything, to make her feel safe again. The fear in her eyes was more than he could bear, and as the bus driver and teachers exchanged uncertain looks, Sam knew that standing idly by wasn't an option. Without a second thought, Sam stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sudden movement startled everyone, but he didn't care. He took a deep breath, his jaw set in a firm line. Delilah needed him, she needed someone who could make a decision, someone who could take charge and shield her from whatever threat was lurking in the shadows. "Enough," Sam said, his voice firm, but calm, cutting through the murmur of the teachers. He walked toward Delilah, his every step purposeful. He knelt down beside her, his presence steadying her in the midst of her panic. His hand hovered for a moment before he gently placed it on her shoulder, offering her a quiet sense of reassurance. "Delilah," he said softly but with undeniable determination. "We're going to get you out of here. Right now, you're not alone. I promise you, we'll figure this out." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since she had stepped onto the bus, there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, hope, even if it was faint. Sam could see that she was still shaken, her body trembling, but something in his unwavering resolve gave her the strength to push through her fear, if only just for a moment. Turning to the teachers, Sam didn't wait for permission. "We need to get the police involved. Whatever's going on with Delilah, we can't ignore it. We can't let her deal with this alone." The bus driver and teachers nodded, but it was clear they were still processing the severity of the situation. Sam didn't care about their hesitation. He could see Delilah's fear, hear the unspoken pleas in her silence. It was enough to fuel his resolve. He wasn't about to let the situation slip through their fingers. He stood, taking Delilah's hand, and gave her a small but confident smile. "We're doing this, okay? Together." As they made their way to the front of the bus, Sam's mind was already racing ahead, planning his next move. He knew that getting the authorities involved was just the beginning. He'd make sure Delilah was protected, no matter what it took. The look of terror in her eyes was a constant reminder that this was far from over, but Sam was ready to fight for her, every step of the way. Sam's hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone, his mind still racing with thoughts of what Delilah had revealed. He needed to act quickly, and the first thing that came to mind was reaching out for professional help. His fingers pressed the screen, dialing the number he knew by heart, Ms. Blake, the school counselor. Delilah deserved more than just vague assurances from teachers, she needed someone who was trained to handle situations like this. The phone rang twice before Ms. Blake's calm, reassuring voice filled the air. "Hello, Sam. How can I help?" "Ms. Blake, it's Sam. Something's wrong. Delilah, she's been through something serious. I don't think it's safe for her right now. She's scared, and I don't think she can handle being alone. I don't know what to do." His words came out in a rush, his concern for Delilah overtaking his usual composed demeanor. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then Ms. Blake's voice softened, filled with understanding and professionalism. "Okay, Sam. I'm listening. Tell me what happened. We're going to take this step by step." Sam took a deep breath, glancing at Delilah, whose eyes were wide and searching, her body still tense with the weight of her secret. She just confessed that something happened a while ago, something that's still affecting her. "She's terrified, Ms. Blake. She's afraid to be on the bus, and I don't think she can stay at school today." Ms. Blake's tone was firm yet soothing, a voice Sam trusted in moments like this. "You did the right thing by reaching out, Sam. Don't worry, we'll make sure Delilah gets the support she needs. First, I'm going to call the school's security team and make sure that Delilah is taken somewhere safe, away from any potential danger. Then, I'll make sure you both have a private space where you can talk, and we'll figure out the best steps to take next." Relief washed over Sam as Ms. Blake's calm assurance wrapped around him like a lifeline. She had always been the one to offer sound advice, but hearing it now felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders. Delilah needed guidance, and Sam was more than willing to make sure she got it. "I'll be right there, Sam," Ms. Blake continued. "Don't let her out of your sight. I'll help you handle this." Sam nodded even though she couldn't see him, grateful for her prompt response. He turned back to Delilah, who was looking at him with a mixture of confusion and hope. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, even though he didn't feel entirely calm himself. "You hear that? Help is on the way. Ms. Blake's going to be here soon. We're going to figure this out together. Delilah didn't say anything, but her shoulders seemed to relax just a fraction, the weight of her secret momentarily lifting. Sam stayed close, keeping his hand gently on her shoulder, silently reassuring her that she wasn't alone. As the minutes stretched on, Sam could feel the tension in the air. He stayed by Delilah's side, his heart still hammering in his chest as he tried to keep his focus on one thing, keeping her safe. The other students on the bus had grown quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation. Sam's resolve had solidified into something unshakable. He wasn't just helping Delilah, he was protecting her, guiding her through the storm that had already broken in her life. When Ms. Blake arrived, her presence seemed to calm everything. She immediately went to Delilah, kneeling beside her, speaking in a voice that was calm and steady, letting her know that everything would be okay. Delilah, Ms. Blake said softly, I'm here now. We're going to help you, but first, I need you to trust me. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Delilah's eyes flickered between Sam and Ms. Blake, a small tear slipping down her cheek as she finally allowed herself to lean into the support being offered. In that moment, Sam knew that while the road ahead would be difficult, they were no longer fighting it alone. The support of the school counselor was just the beginning of what Delilah needed, and Sam was ready to stand beside her every step of the way. Delilah's breathing slowed as Ms. Blake gently guided her into the school's private counseling room. The atmosphere had changed, the initial panic was starting to settle into something that resembled calm, though still fragile. Sam stood by the door, his hand still holding his phone, awaiting the next step. As Ms. Blake spoke softly to Delilah, assuring her that everything was going to be okay, Sam received the confirmation he had been waiting for. CUC Motivational, the Child Protection Agency, was on their way. When the door to the room opened again, two representatives from CUC Motivational entered. One was a middle-aged woman with a kind yet professional demeanor, and the other was a man, younger but equally serious. Sam watched their every move, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness. This was real now. The process of helping Delilah was officially underway, and there was no turning back. The woman, who introduced herself as Ms. Lynn, spoke first. Sam, we're grateful you called us. You did the right thing. Delilah, we're here to help you, okay? You're safe now, and we'll make sure you have the support you need. Her tone was reassuring, but firm, designed to make Delilah feel understood without overwhelming her. Delilah didn't say anything, but Sam could see the tiniest nod from her, as though the weight of her fear was slowly starting to lessen under the gentle, steady pressure of the professionals around her. The man, whose name was Mr. Hugh, stepped forward with a calm smile. We'll be in touch with your family, Delilah, and we'll work together with Ms. Blake and the school to make sure you're in a safe place. But for now, we just want to talk to you, hear your story, and make sure you're taken care of. Delilah's body was tense, her eyes darting between Sam and the new faces in the room. Sam could sense how hard it was for her to speak, how reluctant she was to trust so many unfamiliar people. But he also noticed the small glimmer of hope in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she realized that this was the help she had been so afraid to seek. Ms. Lynn gently knelt beside her, speaking with a quiet confidence. Delilah, you don't have to tell us everything right now, but when you're ready, we'll listen. We'll help you make the decisions that are best for you. We'll also connect you with other services that can help you heal, and you won't have to do this alone. Sam watched as Delilah's shoulders relaxed a little further, her posture softening with the weight of Ms. Lynn's words. It was a strange thing to witness, how someone so burdened by their own trauma could still have a sliver of hope left to hold on to, and how, with the right support, that hope could grow into something stronger. As the representatives from CUC Motivational continued to speak with Delilah, Sam felt his role shift. It was no longer just about being the friend who had helped Delilah speak up, it was about making sure she continued to get the help she needed, not just now, but in the long term. Ms. Blake had already started the ball rolling, but this was where the real work began, connecting Delilah with people who had the resources and experience to help her heal. Before they left, Ms. Lynn turned to Sam and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've done a lot for her already, Sam. Don't underestimate the power of what you've done by simply being there. We'll take it from here, but we'll keep you in the loop. You're not alone in this, either. Sam nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion crash over him. It had been a long day, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he knew that Delilah was on the path to healing. He had given her a chance, and now the professionals were stepping in to help her rebuild her life. And in that moment, as he looked at Delilah's quiet, tear-streaked face, he understood that this was just the beginning of her journey, but she wouldn't be walking it alone anymore. The Carter family had always seemed like the picture of success from the outside, but those who knew them well understood that their carefully constructed facade concealed a great deal of turmoil. Mr. Carter, a high-ranking executive at a well-established company, was a man driven by ambition. His relentless work ethic had earned him respect in his industry, but it had also distanced him from his family. He was often away on business trips, his presence at home infrequent, and when he was there, his mind seemed elsewhere, lost in meetings, projections, and the pressures of his career. Mrs. Carter, on the other hand, had once been a vivacious woman, always ready with a smile, and deeply involved in her children's lives. But over the years, as her marriage began to deteriorate, she withdrew more and more, succumbing to an overwhelming sense of loneliness. She rarely left the house anymore, becoming reclusive, only leaving her sanctuary when necessary. Her life revolved around her home and the children, but even in those moments, it was clear she was emotionally distant, caught in the grip of her own personal struggles. Their two children, Emily and Jack, were left to navigate this fractured environment on their own. Emily, the older of the two, had always been the responsible one. She tried to fill the gaps left by her parents, taking on more than her fair share of household duties and caring for Jack as best she could. But the burden weighed on her. She had no time for herself, and the emotional toll began to show. Beneath her composed exterior, she was overwhelmed with the weight of her family's dysfunction. She had learned to keep her emotions in check, always trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for Jack, but the cracks in her own facade were starting to show. Jack, just a few years younger than Emily, was struggling in his own way. He didn't fully understand the depth of the issues between his parents, but he could sense the tension and unhappiness that filled their home. He acted out in small ways, becoming withdrawn at school, lashing out at his peers, and getting into trouble. He missed the warmth and joy that a family should have, but no one seemed to notice. His behavior was often dismissed as typical teenage rebellion, but in reality, it was a cry for attention and understanding. He needed someone to reach out to him, but neither of his parents seemed capable of seeing past their own pain to help him. Their home, once a place of love and comfort, had become a cold, silent environment where each person lived in their own isolated world, unable, or unwilling, to bridge the emotional distance between them. The family's dynamics had deteriorated to a point where they no longer communicated openly, and when they did, it was often filled with resentment, frustration, or avoidance. Despite the outward appearances of wealth and status, the Carter family was falling apart behind closed doors. The emotional neglect, the unspoken pain, and the lack of connection had created a deeply fractured family. It wasn't a matter of a single event or mistake that had brought them to this point, but rather a series of missed opportunities, unaddressed issues, and the slow erosion of the bonds that once held them together. Each family member, though living under the same roof, was isolated in their own way, struggling silently in a home that no longer felt like a sanctuary, but rather a place of emotional exile. The new evidence that emerged in the case of the Carter family was both unexpected and compelling. It came in the form of an anonymous tip, a crucial piece of information that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. The tip led authorities to suspect that the Carter family's problems extended beyond emotional turmoil into something much darker. The details provided were vague but hinted at possible criminal activity that had been hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. The tip-off, which was later traced back to a concerned neighbor who had witnessed strange activity around the Carter household, included reports of late-night visitors and suspicious deliveries. While these might have seemed insignificant at first, the authorities soon realized that there was a pattern. It was as though the family was concealing something far more sinister. Investigators began to connect the dots: unexplained financial transactions, mysterious packages, and discrepancies in the family's background checks. With this new information, law enforcement was able to obtain a search warrant for the Carter home. They moved swiftly, knowing that if their suspicions were correct, the evidence could be time-sensitive. Officers arrived at the Carter residence with little warning, their presence at the door a stark contrast to the quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside, the house was eerily still. Mrs. Carter, visibly shaken, was at home, though Mr. Carter was nowhere to be found. The officers immediately began their search, moving through each room with methodical precision. They were looking for anything that might explain the strange behavior that had been reported. Hidden beneath the floorboards, tucked in secret compartments of the attic, and inside locked cabinets, they found a series of documents and items that painted a disturbing picture. Among the items were ledgers detailing large sums of money that had been transferred to offshore accounts, some of which were linked to illicit activities. There were also photographs, carefully stored and labeled, showing individuals who were part of the underworld of crime. The most chilling discovery was a hidden room in the basement, filled with old technology, encrypted devices, and a collection of recordings that suggested illegal surveillance and manipulation. As the investigators pieced together the findings, it became increasingly clear that the Carter family's life was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. What had initially been a case of emotional dysfunction now appeared to involve organized crime, money laundering, and possibly even threats to national security. The once seemingly perfect facade of the Carter family was shattered, revealing a web of deceit and criminal activity that no one had anticipated. The search marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. While the authorities continued to piece together the evidence, they also knew that the family would be subjected to intense scrutiny. The truth, however dark and unsettling, was beginning to surface, and the Carter family's secrets could no longer remain hidden behind closed doors. The consequences of their actions would soon become impossible to ignore. Emily Mitchell, a dedicated counselor at the local school, played a pivotal role in the investigation into the Carter family. Her unwavering commitment to the well-being of her students had earned her the trust of many, and she was often the first person they turned to in times of crisis. It was no surprise then, that when things began to unravel with the Carters, Emily became an essential source of support for those involved. Having worked with Delilah for several years, Emily had noticed the subtle signs of distress in the girl long before the situation escalated. Delilah had always been a quiet and reserved student, but there were moments when Emily saw the weight of something far darker lurking behind her eyes. The girl's sudden withdrawal, her nervous demeanor, and the faint bruises that occasionally appeared, Emily had been quietly observing, though she had no solid proof until Delilah came forward. When Delilah finally confided in Emily, revealing the truth about her family's situation and the horrors she had been enduring, Emily immediately took action. She knew that Delilah needed more than just a sympathetic ear, she needed protection, and she needed to be taken seriously. Emily contacted the appropriate authorities and connected Delilah with resources that could help her. However, her support didn't stop there. Emily became Delilah's emotional anchor, making sure she felt safe and heard during such a turbulent time. When the investigation into the Carter family grew more complex, Emily was called in by law enforcement to provide her insight into Delilah's emotional state. Her knowledge of the girl's history, combined with her understanding of family dynamics, made her an invaluable resource. She helped investigators understand the psychological effects of the abuse Delilah had endured and guided them through the delicate process of interviewing her. As the situation developed, Emily's role expanded to offering continued emotional support to Delilah, ensuring that the young girl had someone she could trust in the midst of a whirlwind of legal procedures and media attention. Emily also kept in touch with the school, offering counseling to the students who were affected by the case, as many had known Delilah and the Carters on a personal level. She was instrumental in ensuring that the community was supported as the events unfolded. Emily Mitchell's involvement in the case not only helped bring justice to Delilah, but also demonstrated the profound impact that compassionate, dedicated professionals can have on a community in crisis. Her quiet strength and steady presence provided the foundation for the healing process, both for Delilah and for the broader network of individuals who were touched by the tragedy. Sam sat in the dimly lit office, the weight of the past few weeks pressing heavily on his shoulders. The investigation into the Carter family had taken unexpected turns, but now, after all the chaos, there was finally a moment of relief. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the tense silence. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Emily Mitchell, the school counselor who had been supporting Delilah through everything. "Sam, I wanted to let you know that Delilah is safe. She's been placed with a foster family, and they're great. She's doing well, and we're monitoring everything closely." A wave of relief washed over Sam. It felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest. He'd spent so many sleepless nights worrying about Delilah, unsure of whether she would ever be free from the grips of the Carter family's dysfunction. But now, he knew she was in a place where she could heal, where she could finally start to rebuild her life without fear or shame. Sam leaned back in his chair, the exhaustion from the past few weeks finally catching up with him. His mind briefly flashed to Delilah's face, those eyes full of fear and sadness when she had first confided in him. It had been an agonizing decision for her to come forward, but now that she was safe, it all seemed worth it. He quickly typed a response to Emily. "Thank you. This means everything to me, and I'm sure it does to her too. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help moving forward." As he hit send, Sam felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The journey wasn't over, but this was the first real step toward healing for Delilah. She had a long road ahead, but with the right people around her, Emily, her new foster family, and a team of professionals, he knew she would find her way to a brighter future. Sam knew that he would be there for her, every step of the way, just as he had promised. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, knowing that Delilah was finally safe. The courthouse was buzzing with anticipation as the trial for the Carter family began. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension, every eye focused on the judge's bench where Judge Henry Wilson sat, preparing to oversee the case. Sam stood at the back of the room, his thoughts racing as he watched the events unfold. He had been through a lot in recent weeks, but nothing compared to the gravity of this moment, the trial of a family that had been the source of so much pain for Delilah. The prosecution team, led by Daniel Hayes, stood ready, their expressions firm and resolute. Delilah's testimony had been crucial, and her bravery in coming forward had made this moment possible. Sam had witnessed firsthand how difficult it had been for her to open up about the horrors she'd endured, but now she was a vital part of the case, her words a powerful weapon in the fight for justice. Across the courtroom, the defense team, led by a sharp, calculating attorney, was ready to fight back. The Carter family was determined to maintain their innocence, their lawyer arguing that the allegations were exaggerated or fabricated. But Sam knew better. He had seen the evidence, the heartbreaking details that had been carefully collected over the course of the investigation. The physical and emotional scars left on Delilah were undeniable. There was no turning back now. As the trial began, Delilah's testimony was the first to be presented. Sam had been concerned about how she would handle it, how she would feel when faced with the people who had caused her so much pain. But to his surprise, Delilah was strong. She spoke with a calm that belied the trauma she had endured. She didn't flinch as she recounted the abuse she had suffered at the hands of her own family. It was clear to everyone in the room that her words were not just a cry for justice, but a powerful statement of resilience. The defense attorney tried to discredit her testimony, casting doubt on her credibility, but the evidence spoke for itself. The medical reports, the interviews with school staff, and the statements from people who had witnessed the abuse, it all painted a damning picture. Sam watched as the Carter family's lawyer grew increasingly defensive, knowing they had no real defense left. The truth had been laid bare. As the days of the trial dragged on, emotions ran high. Witnesses testified, experts gave their opinions, and the case slowly, steadily built toward its inevitable conclusion. Sam knew this was more than just a trial, it was a battle for Delilah's future, and for every child who had ever been silenced by fear. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was packed with people on edge. Judge Wilson had carefully considered the evidence, and now it was time for the decision. The room fell silent as the judge stood, looking over the gathered crowd. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all counts," Judge Wilson declared. A wave of emotion swept through the room. For Sam, it was a moment of bittersweet relief. Delilah was no longer the victim of her past, she was a survivor, and this verdict was the first step toward her reclaiming her life. The Carter family was facing the consequences of their actions, and the justice system had upheld its duty. Sam turned to look at Delilah, who was sitting quietly in the front row. She didn't smile, but there was a new strength in her eyes, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. As the courtroom emptied, Sam felt a quiet pride in what had been accomplished. The fight wasn't over, there were still legal proceedings to follow, still healing for Delilah to do, but today, justice had been served. And for Sam, that was enough. The journey of healing for Delilah was not an easy one. Even after the trial had ended and the verdict delivered, the emotional weight of everything she had endured continued to press heavily on her. She had faced horrors no child should ever know, and while justice had been served, it didn't erase the scars, physical or emotional, that lingered. The loss she had suffered, the betrayal from the very people who were supposed to protect her, was something that couldn't be undone. In the months following the trial, Delilah found herself in therapy, slowly opening up about her past, confronting the darkness that had once consumed her. At first, the sessions were filled with silence, hesitant words, and painful memories that were still raw and difficult to speak. But with each passing week, Delilah began to realize that healing was a gradual process. She was no longer that frightened, lost child, she had become stronger, more resilient, even if she didn't always feel that way. Her foster family, though kind and supportive, couldn't replace what she had lost. There were days when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when the grief of never having experienced a safe and loving family weighed on her heart. Yet, as she spent more time with her new family, Delilah began to understand that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning to live with it, finding the strength to rebuild herself piece by piece. Emily Mitchell, her counselor, had been a constant source of support. She never pushed Delilah too hard, never demanded more than she was ready to give. She simply listened, offering gentle guidance and a safe space for Delilah to explore her emotions without fear of judgment. Slowly, Delilah began to realize that her past didn't define her. She was more than what had happened to her, more than the pain that had scarred her. She was a survivor. Sam, too, remained a steady presence in her life. His support, though not as direct as Emily's, had meant the world to Delilah. He had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, and now he respected her journey, offering encouragement from the sidelines. Sam understood that healing wasn't about rushing through the process, it was about letting Delilah take control of her own path, no matter how long it took. As the months turned into years, Delilah's transformation became evident. She started to speak more freely, to share parts of herself that had once been locked away in silence. Her foster family continued to provide a foundation of love and care, helping her to navigate the ups and downs of life with a newfound sense of confidence. Though the memories of her past would always be a part of her, Delilah began to see herself in a new light. She wasn't just a victim, she was someone who had fought for her own life, someone who had refused to let her past define her future. And in the quiet moments, when she would allow herself to reflect, Delilah understood that while the loss she had experienced would never be completely healed, she was learning to live with it. The pain was still there, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had found the strength to build a new life, and that, she realized, was the greatest form of healing she could ever achieve. Delilah, in her quiet moments of reflection, began to feel something she hadn't in years: hope. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but a slow, gradual awakening. At first, it was a flicker, like a small spark in the darkness. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to believe in it, but the more she experienced the kindness of those around her, the more that spark grew. Her foster parents, who had become a source of stability and care, treated her not as a broken child but as a whole person with dreams, fears, and potential. They encouraged her to pursue her interests, to try things she never thought possible: art, reading, even taking small steps toward making friends. These moments of encouragement began to reshape the way Delilah viewed herself. She wasn't just the girl who had been abandoned, she was a girl with a future she could shape with her own hands. It was Emily, too, who helped Delilah find this new hope. Through their sessions, Emily taught her that healing was not linear, and that even in the midst of setbacks, there was always room for growth. Delilah began to see that her past, while painful, had not closed all doors to her future. With every session, she learned how to harness her pain, not to let it define her, but to use it as a source of strength. Delilah began to dream again. She envisioned herself going to college one day, becoming someone who could help other children who had been through similar pain. She thought of a future where she could be a voice for those who felt voiceless, a future where the darkness of her past would no longer hold power over her. The fear of failure, the uncertainty of the future, still haunted her at times, but it no longer consumed her. The vision of a hopeful future began to take root, growing stronger with each passing day. Sam, too, played a part in her newfound hope. His constant support, though less direct than Emily's, was just as important. He had been a symbol of stability in the chaos of her life, and now, even as she began to navigate the world on her own, Sam remained a trusted ally, a reminder that there were people who cared deeply about her well-being and believed in her potential. Delilah's journey was far from over, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had the power to face them. Hope wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it had become a quiet, steady presence in her heart. She had learned to trust that despite the hardships, she could rebuild, she could grow, and she could one day live a life full of possibilities, just as she had always deserved.